So in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the basics of drawing with graphite pencil, a few of the ideas and techniques that I myself have found the most useful and helpful. I'm going to be using a range of graphite pencils from a 5B, being the softest and the darkest, to a 6H, which is much lighter and much harder, along with my kneaded eraser and a stump, which is one of the most valuable tools that you have and will help you a lot in getting those smooth textures that you want. I'm going to start out with my initial sketch on a harder but not too hard, because I don't want to scratch the paper up too much, with a 2H, which is a fairly medium pencil. For the initial sketch, a lot of people have trouble with that, so I'm just going to be doing something simple, a human nose. And this kind of stuff, noses, eyes, ears, mouths, are really great ways to start and to help you get a little bit more of an understanding on the textures and the feels that you're going to want to get when you eventually start drawing portraiture. There's a lot of different things that people use to get their sketches looking realistic, but for this I'm just going to do it freehand. I'm going to draw this first initial outline very lightly, just to make sure that I don't ruin the tack on this paper, and still am able to erase this initial sketch if I need to, if I mess it up, or if I decide that I want a little bit of a different looking image. Right now I'm just going to put a little outline of exactly where I want the highlights that are going to be pure white, and then the rest of this, in a moment, I'm going to darken it all up. Want to take out as much of this initial sketch so that you don't see any actual lines. You only want the different value scales. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of a harder, lighter pencil, a 4H or a 6H, and I'm going to put a little bit of shading with really small circular motions with this 4H and 6H, just to get that initial shading and darkening to give it the look of skin. So for this part, I'm just going to be looking at my image that I'm drawing this nose from, and I'm just going to be copying those values the best that I possibly can. It's really important not to look at images that you're drawing as a whole and try and copy that whole. It's best to look at each individual portion of that and then just do one piece at a time that will eventually build on top of each other to create a finished image. Sometimes it's good to just look at the values and the lines and not worry at all about what they make up, just to try and recreate those specific pieces of the image itself. Now what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to use this stump, and the stump, it literally just blends the graphite together and gives it a really smooth and good texture. You can also use what's called a tortillon, which is very, very similar to a stump, except it gets a little bit more of a harder look. That's important in certain different things, but honestly, the stump is probably the most important and the thing that I use the most. If you don't have a stump, honestly, you can use your finger, you can use a cotton ball, you can use a Q-tip, you can use anything that would smear and like smudge the graphite into a smoother looking image. At this point, I'm going to start putting in the darker tones, putting in the nice little edges on the nostril there, just emulating as best as I can the image that I am looking at. And yes, I am looking at an image. I'm not coming up with exactly what a nose looks like just from my memory. Smooth circular motions are the key to making things that don't look like drawings. If you ever want to get a really hyper-realistic drawing, you have to master the ability to do motions with your pencil that don't leave lines, because when people see lines, they see drawings. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes you want just a really good drawing, but sometimes you want to fool people into thinking that it's real. So I'm just going to continue putting in as many of the little details that I see in this photograph as I can into this image. It's really important to get every single shadow and light spot and dark spot and medium tone that you can, because that's going to make the image look as realistic as possible. It's going to make a lot more sense where the light source is coming from. Now as I'm putting in this line, as you can see, it's making it a lot more amateur looking, honestly. And that's why you need to make sure, if you ever put in a line like that, then you add a value that equals that line. So in a moment, I'm gonna start and I'm gonna finish that line, and I'm gonna have it go off to the left into space as a shadow, as a darker value, not just as a line. But first I'm gonna smooth out a few of these areas right here just to make them as skin tone looking as I possibly can. Any portion of the drawing that I look at and I can see the any kind of like a line or a imprint that looks like a pencil mark, I want to try and take away and make it look as realistic as I possibly can. And those tiny little details, they may seem silly and like I'm overdoing it, but once you put all those little tiny details together, that's when the entire image is going to look a lot more realistic and a lot better. But it's also important to make sure you get those light spots and the little reflected areas, because even more than the dark spots, those are going to really make the image believable to look at. So now I'm going to start putting in the shading on that left side to make it so that there's no lines whatsoever, which in this photo the left side of the face is going to be in shadow, and that also is going to make the rest of the image make more sense as to the positioning of the light source that this image is reflecting, as well as the dark areas that should be apparent by the way that I'm shading this image. I'm going to use a 5B as my pencil for shading this side because I wanted to get it as dark as I can to give it a good contrast to the light of that nose on the right side. So as I'm coming towards the end of this, I'm just going to try and make sure I get the blackest blacks in the dark areas and the whitest whites and just smooth it out as best as I can so there's no little part that might stand out as looking unfinished in comparison to the rest of the image, along with putting in a few final details. Right now I'm using a 4H, which is definitely a little bit of a harder pencil, but sometimes that's good to go over a area that was drawn by a darker pencil with a lighter pencil, because it kind of just like pushes down the tack of the paper and it will even out some of the tones. And then just to finish up, I'm just gonna use that stump one more time to make sure that every little part looks even and smooth and exactly how I want it to be.